Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Feel free in the chat box to drop where you're from and what do you hope to learn. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today for our webinar. Let's see where folks are from here. Feel free to drop it in the chat box. Okay, we got some folks from New York. Hello, Trisha. Oh my goodness, nice to see you. It's been so long. Feel free to drop where you're from in the chat box. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started because this is a pretty tight timeline. And so I want to make sure that we get through everything. My name is Dr. Anise Fisher. I'm the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching, and we have an exciting lineup for you today to talk about what does it mean to create inclusive environments. I will speak for about the first 10 minutes, and then we have guest panelists who will be speaking with us, Dr. C.G. Ann Heiser, who is a Senior Impact Officer at Developing Capacity and the founder of Co-Creating Action, Rose Francois, who's the manager for DEIB at Opportunity at Work and the founder of Rising Up, and then Tara Levy, who's the founder of Liberated Arts Movement, but she's also a former educator and an activist, or an artivist, as I like to say. So they're going to go off camera for a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and get started with my part of the session, and then I will invite them back to be in community with us. Okay, shall we go ahead and get started? Feel free to continue to drop where you're from and what do you hope to learn in the chat box. So we like to start all of our sections with a land and labor acknowledgement. And we do this for a variety of different reasons. Number one, to honor the indigenous lands that I am sitting on in the city of Chicago, but also to acknowledge our solidarity with our indigenous brothers and sisters and their desire to have reparations in the return of wealth and land, as well as to honor their tilling the land and taking care of the land before we came into colonization. We also like to give a labor acknowledgement to acknowledge the labor of our enslaved brothers and sisters who have tilled this land as well, but whose backbreaking and brutal labor created the financial institutions and built and invented much of the things that we enjoy today that we will never know their names. And so we like to honor their labor and also stand in solidarity with reparations. I also want to speak to the fact that we're coming into this space off of two national tragedies that I know of at this moment. There was the anti-Black terror that happened in Jacksonville, Florida on this weekend, where 3 Black people were killed by a white supremacist. We're also acknowledging the gun violence that took place at UNC Chapel Hill yesterday, where a faculty member was killed. Both Dr. Heiser and I worked at Chapel Hill. That's where we met. And so we know that many of us are bringing some heaviness into the space. So we think it's even more important for us to take a pause moment and to center ourselves with a few deep breaths, because I imagine many of us are holding different things in our time together. So I want to invite you to close your eyes, and I'm just going to lead you through a guided breath meditation just to bring yourself into the space. So if you want to close your eyes and go ahead and take a deep breath in, and I'm going to count to 3. Release. Take a deep breath in. Release. Deep breath in. Release. Thank you all for breathing with us and pausing. Feel free to come back into the space as you're comfortable. I'm going to move into our outcomes for today. We have 3 things that we want to accomplish in community. 1, to define inclusion in the workplace, to identify parameters for creating an inclusive workplace, and then to share our include protocol for developing norms. As you're coming in, feel free to drop where you're from and what do you hope to learn in the chat box. So here's a little bit about us as a company developing capacity. At the heart of what you're seeing on this graphic is, we exist to coach people to effectively lead for equity and justice. At the core of what we do, we come alongside people and we partner with them to build capacity, which means that we're about building skills for people to lead for equity. We provide coaching, whether it's one-on-one executive coaching through our IA program, or when we come alongside people to basically help folks to see that you are the one that can create an inclusive environment. You don't need to be the chief diversity officer to be able to do that. So a lot of our work is grounded in this concept of power and choice, and you utilizing your power and choice. Then everything we do is focus on data-informed decision-making. So whether that's our reflective protocols, our structural equity checks, or the groundbreaking equity evaluation work that we do under Dr. Heiser's arm of our house, we're all about ensuring that we use data to inform the decisions that we make. One thing that's signature to developing capacity is that you're always going to lead with a blueprint. So if you follow us on social media, you will see us dropping all sorts of protocols and blueprints, because our goal is to ensure that people have something that they can use and to be tactical and to be practical. So we're not a 30,000 in the foot company. We're about how can you be practical and tactical. Everything we do is based on our core values of equity, love, healing, and justice. And we really believe that in order to create spaces for people to effectively lead for equity and justice at work, in this context, we have to enter in and partner with people across 3 different domains. One is around transforming personal leadership, and that's through our executive coaching, our conscious leadership for equity coaching, or our course. We come alongside folks and work with them at the team level, because sometimes people say, we can't do any org change until my team gets together, or we can enter in and shift organizational culture. And so what you're experiencing through our webinar programs are our build equity culture. We're giving you strategies and tools to exercise leadership that will build a culture of equity within your organization. So the key foundational piece that we want to lay here is that when we talk about inclusion today, it is inclusion in service of equity and anti-racism. This slide is not going to be on your nice handout that Dr. Heiser created, so feel free to screenshot it if you'd like, but please cite Black women. What we wanted to provide a foundation for is, what are the key steps to building an equity culture? First, we want to define equity for you at the base level. In developing capacity, for us, equity means that all people across race, class, gender, they have full access and equal access. Full access means that there are no barriers in the way of Black people or Latinas or Indigenous folks or women in your organization. They have equal access. How do you know they have equal access? There are no racial disparities in your organization. But access isn't enough. It's about people being able to participate in and benefit from the resources in your organizations, both at the staff level, the collaborator level, and the stakeholder level. And in order to achieve equity, you have to disrupt the status quo so that you can bring in diverse people. That's the diversity. You have to be willing to say, we are going to dismantle any system that is a threat to inclusion, that is a threat to full and equal, and that we're going to be willing to rebuild for equity. So we're not about tearing down without rebuilding, and we rebuild with this idea of full and equal in mind. Now, anti-racism is a form of equity. It's the form of equity that focuses on addressing racial injustices. So when anti-racism is present in a culture, all people of color are experiencing that definition of equity in your organization. You have gotten to a place where white cultural perspectives are no longer the default norm in your organization. That means how I wear my hair, the type of earrings, how I speak. It's not being judged based on white cultural perspectives. We decenter that in honor of serving the humanity and honoring the humanity of all racial groups. Anti-racism is present in an organization when white people and people of color are working in true interracial solidarity. How do we know there's interracial solidarity? People are heard, seen, they're respected, they are promoted, there's no disparities in the leader line, and they are given authority to be able to move things within the organization. Those are our North Stars. Today, we're going to be talking about inclusion. And inclusion is not something that just happens. You have to curate inclusion by creating an environment. So in order for people to feel heard, seen, and respected, there has to be a set of norms for how people should be treated in the organization. So we're going to talk about today, the foundation of creating inclusion is creating a normed environment where people are heard, seen, and respected across their identities. Today, we're going to focus in on the people domain. When we come back for part 2, we're going to talk to you about sustaining inclusive environments happens when you do your policies and your processes, when it's embedded. So I hope folks are following me here. So at the baseline, when we define what is inclusion, inclusion is about how we all play together. So when you have all of these different identity groups in a space, are you valuing and respecting all these social identities by treating everyone in a fair and just manner consistently? That means if we were to poll people in your organization, whether it's a Black woman, a Latina, an Asian sister, they're going to say, or a gay brother, they will say that they are treated consistently fair and just. They are heard, seen, and respected. In order to have that be a yes for people in your organization, you have to be willing to disrupt any biases in people's belief systems, any biases that are showing up in individual actions in your culture or in your structures. So what I'm going to do is to walk you through a protocol called Include. It's our protocol for developing norms within an organization, because inclusion cannot happen in your organization if you do not have norms. So let me just do a poll in the chat box. How many of your organizations have norms around inclusion and you actually stick to them? Drop it in the chat box for me right now. I want to see the chat box start to light up, please. I want to get a sense of where people are. What we often find when we go into work with organizations is that many people either do not have norms, but if they have them, they don't actually hold people accountable. So your task today is I'm going to walk you through this Include protocol. Then I will drop this protocol in the chat box when I'm done so that you can then take it to your organization. And if you are the manager or the director, honey, you have no excuse but to make it happen. And if you are not the manager or the director, you can still go to your supervisor and talk about setting norms, or you can have that conversation with people around the coffee table. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the protocol for how do you create norms around inclusion. The I stands for invitation. So you have to invite people into inclusion. So imagine you're at your next meeting and you let folks know that you're going to be having a norms development session for inclusion. And you are going to bring the team together and you're going to ask them this question. What are the minimum requirements needed to value and respect all social identities by treating everyone in a fair and just manner? I want you to take a moment to answer that question for yourself. Think about your own work environment. What are the minimum requirements needed to value and respect people across race and class and gender by treating everyone in a fair manner? That means their humanity is honored, in a just manner. Go ahead and take a moment to answer that for yourself. Just jot it down on whatever paper is in front of you. And the key thing here is that we have to invite people into inclusion. We have to create what a normed environment around inclusion is within our organization. We can have all the values in the world. We can post all the things we want. We can say that we're anti-racist, but if you all don't have norms for what that looks like in practice, then it's going to be really hard to measure whether or not it's taking place. So this protocol I'm going to teach you is borrowed from the minimum specs protocol from Liberating Structures. So I'm going to move us along here for the sake of time, but you bring everyone together in the group and you ask the team, what are the minimum requirements needed to value and respect all social identities by treating everyone in a fair and just manner? You give everybody about 5 minutes to write down their own short list of norms. And think about this as the minimum requirements for how we behave. And I want to be clear here in saying that inclusion doesn't mean we invite white supremacist perspectives. We don't invite harmful behaviors that dishonor another race or group of people. That's not what inclusion is. We don't include things that harmful mindsets and perspectives. And I want to clarify that because sometimes people think inclusion means you invite everything to the table. The next thing is in. After everyone has written their short list, you're going to then narrow down the groups. You're going to break people into small groups or pairs, and you're going to give them time to discuss their individual responses in their pair. And your direction to the pair is that the pair should come up with one norm that they can raise to the group that will foster inclusion. From the pair, you're going to begin to come back to the large group. And as a large group, you're not going to have your big white post-it paper or yellow. And every group or pair is going to share one proposed norm. And that's going to be your list of norms. And now from condensing them from the small groups to the big group, you're going to engage in a discussion. You're going to lead the group in a discussion on this list of norms that you have. And you're going to just open the floor and give everybody a chance to discuss their thoughts on these proposed norms. So if you have 5 groups, give people time to discuss their thoughts on these 5 norms. Now, as the facilitator of this group, you need to monitor to ensure that all voices are heard, seen, and respected across diverse backgrounds, years of experience, and years in the organization. You have to be looking and intentionally seeking out inclusion in the discussion. Once you've had your initial discussion, you're going to move into beginning to get the group to understand the importance of each norm. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through the list of each norm. If you have 5 norms, and you're going to go to each norm and you're going to ask the group, could we achieve inclusion if we abandon this norm? So if the norm is treat people in a manner that honors their dignity, you will ask folks, can we achieve inclusion if we abandon this norm? If the answer is no, then that norm stays on the list. If the answer is yes, then it gets discarded. Okay, and you will keep your conversation going. This is probably going to take you about 15 or 20 minutes to go through these norms. And you go through with each one of them. If people say, what does it mean to honor the dignity? Great question. The group will have to define, what does it mean to honor dignity? What does that actually look like? From there, you're going to decide on the final list of norms by a majority vote. So you're going to go through whatever norms. If you have 5 norms left or 3 norms left at this time because you've discarded a few of them, then you will vote on those norms by a majority vote. If you end up with a list longer than 5, because it is possible, then you need to go back and say, okay, if we abandon this norm, could we achieve inclusion? So you want to get it down to 3 to 5. I don't recommend any norms longer than 3 and 5 because we barely can remember basic things in our organizations. And having the norms of 20 norms and 10 norms, people are not going to remember that. So 3 to 5 is really essential for you to narrow the list down to and get to a final vote. And the last thing in this protocol is just not enough to have norms, because some people say you have norms, but you don't follow them. You have to embed, evaluate, and evolve. So you have to embed these norms into your practice. Post them on your agendas. Every agenda that you all have in an organization, your norm should be in the footer of that agenda. You should put them in your shared documents. Your norms should be a part of your performance reviews. How well does Trisha live these 4 norms? What feedback do you have for Trisha to improve in these norm areas? You should use them in one-on-one settings when you're meeting with people. How well did we live our norms? The group should determine what is the process for violating norms. What happens if someone doesn't live up to these norms? What is the process? And then quarterly, I would bring the group together to discuss how are we doing well and where do we need to grow. When we use norms in group meetings, and I do this when I lead my sessions with people, in those actual meetings, people will have a norm checker, which means you ask 2 people in the organization to watch the group to monitor whether or not we're living these norms. And then at the end of your meeting, those 2 people will report out and say, this is what we did well, this is where we need to grow. So it's a way to build it into your practice. And you continually embed it into what you're doing, put it in your shared documents, your performance reviews, your feedback protocols, and then you evolve. What's working, what's not working. Do this for a solid 3 months. For 1 quarter, you'll be able to see what norms make sense, what norms don't make sense. Are we missing a norm? But in order for you to truly say that we have created an inclusive work environment, it is important to have norms based on inclusion. So I will advise everyone who's sitting here under the sound of my ears, if you do not have norms based on inclusion, to take this protocol and implement it within your organization. I'm going to go ahead in the chat box and I'm going to drop for you this include protocol that will be easy for you to use within your organizations. So I just walked you through what it looked like, but you have everything ready to go. So when you come back next month, you're going to be telling us what happened in your norm protocol. I'm going to stop talking and invite our panelists to come on for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to have time for question and answer. So this isn't the end of it. You will have time to ask your questions. You can drop them in the Q&A box. And so I'm inviting up Rose Francois, Dr. C.G. Heiser, and Tara Levy. And just one last plug, don't forget to join us for our next webinar, because the next webinar, we're going to be talking to you about how do you sustain inclusive work environment. So we're going to be talking to you about how do you embed it in your policies and your processes. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite, I'm going to invite them into the space. Okay. So let's go ahead and get going. Are we ready? Feel free to unmute yourselves. Okay.
Ready.
So they have heard me talk a lot about this protocol, but you all have had specific experiences on creating an inclusive work environment. So I want to start with Rose. Would you share with us some essential elements for creating an inclusive work environment?
First, thank you, Dr. Fisher, for having me. And I'm excited to chat about this. So the biggest thing that comes up for me when I think about an inclusive environment, right? Because the outcome, we want people to feel a sense of belonging, is data, right? We need to listen to the people. We also need inclusive leadership. Senior leaders, people managers, right? They need to have a DEI vision. They need to have a knowledge of bias, culture competency, and a collaboration practice and communication process for the organization. Because a lot of times, if our leaders are not showing up as inclusive, it's really difficult for team members to follow that path, right? And so having inclusive leadership is really critical. The other thing is we have entire inclusion, we embedded inclusion within the entire process of the employee experience, right? Or we call it people experience. So from recruiting, from onboarding, from managing, performance management, training, skills development. And one thing that's really critical, an opportunity at work and a message we speak is about STARS, a talent strategy for folks who are skilled through alternative routes rather than a 4-year degree. And skills, and showing people that skills first hiring is a way to be inclusive. How do you do skills-based teaching, skills-based training, right? How do you recognize people for the different strengths and perspectives they come with? That's so important. And the other pieces here I have is we have to really celebrate and acknowledge people. It's not enough to have the processes in place and have inclusive leadership, because acknowledging and celebrating diversity could be the difference between people actually feeling like they're accepted, as opposed to I have to code switch because, you know, we say this, but we don't actually live it. And a couple things I put in here is just bias is understood. People understand what it looks like and what it looks like to show up in a biased way and what it looks like to not show up in a biased way, right? So it can be easy to have those coaching conversations, those feedback discussions, those one-on-one, and build connections closer together as opposed to further apart, which harms environments. Inclusive cultures also, lastly, I'll say is the DEI efforts feel authentic. And it's not just something that we're doing to check the box. And people actually feel like, wow, like I'm valued, I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm respected, right? And maybe I'm not, all my decisions aren't a part of the decision, but I know it was considered. But because of X, right, I understand why we weren't able to move forward in that way, but I can see the impact that value that helps and values the organization.
Thank you, Rose. So if I were to capture that, it was inclusion needs to be baked into your hiring and selection processes. You need to ensure that your leadership is actually inclusive of those diverse groups, heard, seen, and respected. And third, it needs to be something that's embedded into everything that you do and feel authentic. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Heiser to share what does an inclusive environment look like and be specific about the elements. And then I will turn it over to Tara.
So I think that in my experience, an inclusive environment, I want to echo the communication processes. How is information communicated? People often feel like they're somehow floating on the outside of an inner circle when there's not strong communication practices. I also want to say the recognizing people's strengths, and something that you can do if you have a large team or a small team is engage in an activity called SOAR. And it's actually like an environmental scanning process that's often used for strategic planning purposes, but allows you to ask questions about what are your strengths and our strengths? What are the opportunities that are in front of us right now? What are the aspirations that we have as individuals in our role, or as a combined community of expertise? And what are the results that we want to see, or the impact that we want to be able to say that we have had, and we are able to demonstrate that impact? And so this kind of activity can really just allow people to talk about the good parts of the work. And it allows you to see what's important to them. I came into a leadership role of a pre-existing team and then was asked to incorporate another person into that team while also taking over the team. And so this was a great activity for me to just come in and earn their trust. Sometimes people get tripped up when they're put in a positional power position. And that trust is two ways, right? So I really went in with a mentality of like, I need to earn their trust. And a great way to do that was to understand what they thought was important and possible given their talent and expertise. It also allowed me to know what was motivating to them to move the needle on in terms of data. And so then when we would hit those data markers, we would celebrate. And I've never seen a group of people be so stuck as when I ask them questions like, how do you know you're valued? What actions make you feel valued? Can you tell me about the last time you were thriving? You really see people start to process for themselves, like what does feel good to them. And so I asked those questions to everybody I interacted with. I also think that there's this element of, so when we celebrated, I tried to weave those components in around value so that it was authentic and did not feel performative. And I think one of the huge indicators for me that this is becoming an inclusive culture was when I was out sick unexpectedly one day and we had hit a large metric as a team. And one of the team members independently went to the store and got like sparkling apple cider and donuts because we had a student who was under 21 on our team, and brought them into the office and like walked around and told everyone in the suite, like, we did this big thing. Do you want to celebrate with us? And so I think that those are all elements of an inclusive culture. But I'll also say, maybe counterintuitively, is that people start to get a lot more comfortable saying things like, I messed up. I need a proactive sick day. I can feel my tank draining. I don't want to wait until I've bottomed out to take leave. So you start to see a shift in how people perceive themselves. Another thing that I saw in inclusive culture, and this is my last thing, is that I could hear from my office one day, somebody on the phone screaming at a team member. They were really upset. And I went in their office and I said, I'm really sorry to interrupt your call. could you please let that person know you'll call them back? And they were in a tight spot because I was their supervisor and they were with this really disgruntled person. And so I let them leverage me and my presence to get out of a bad situation. And I said to them afterwards, I don't know what your work history is or your personal history is, but you need to know that as a part of this team, it is never acceptable for someone to speak to you that way. I don't care if it's the president's office. I will call and say, we're happy to continue the conversation when you are ready to hear and speak in ways that we can all approach. And I saw over time, people change their standard of how they allowed themselves to be talked to or talked not down to. And that to me also promoted a culture of inclusion. They realized their own value and strength and that they were there as an expert in their own specialty and that deserved respect. And so that was another kind of signal that we were on our way to creating an inclusive culture together.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Heiser. And Tara, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Pretty much, I want to echo everything Dr. Heiser just mentioned, specifically strengths-based. Having a diverse group of people on your team is an asset because everyone has different experiences, different cultures that have shaped their goals and their aspirations, and also the skills that they bring. And so leveraging the strengths that your team has and making a space where people feel safe sharing is one step to build an inclusion.
Thank you. I want to dig a little bit deeper into what steps you took to create an inclusive environment for your team. And I want you to think about inclusion in terms of race, class, gender. Like, how did you ensure that not just you had all these people at the table, but how did Black women feel heard, seen, and respected? How did the Asian person, how did the gay person on your team feel heard, seen, and respected? And I'm going to ask you to try to be very tight. Think of this as an elevator pitch from floor 1 to floor 12 in your responses for me. So we're going to start with Tara, and then we'll.
So realizing that organizations are led by people, so checking in with your people first before any business gets addressed. So having those team meeting check-ins, those icebreakers are essential to playing back to the humanity and the humanness of your team before work gets addressed. And just realizing that your team is to go through their ebbs and flows. So having that space where people can like authentically just share like, hey, this is not a great day today, but I have that space to check in and let you know that this is how I'm feeling. So creating safety and having check-ins and team builders is essential.
Okay. Rose, do you want to go, and then we'll end with Dr. Heiser?
Yeah, just echoing what I was hearing you say is psychological safety, right? It's creating a space where people can feel that if they voice their opinion that's in disagreement or challenges, right? It's going to be heard. It's going to be valued. The other thing I'll add is, in addition to that, right, it's important to look at the communities in the organization, and once we have the structure and the strategy to figure out how can we create, right, employee resource groups. We call them inclusive networks, opportunity at work, but we can create a space for people to have psychological safety, right? As a team, it's important to work together to help our business outcomes. And it's also important for communities, women, LGBTQ folks, Black folks, right? And neurodivergent diversity in folks who maybe identify as a parent or a single parent, to have a space where they can share their lived experiences and communicate. And so that's one practical way that you can do that. And it's so important to build a structure where people are paid for that. It is volunteer, but they're paid. And they do have the training and onboarding and support to lead. And there's a cycle of selection.
Dr. Heiser?
I will echo repeat the SOAR activity, the strengths, opportunities, aspirations, results. I will say affirming everyone's expertise in that, like, oh, this is what you do. I can't do that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What does it mean to do that well to you? I made a couple of commitments, and then I was really impeccable with my word so that they could see me keep my word repeatedly. So one of the things I told them is that if you make a mistake, I know we are still building trust, but here's how I promise you I will respond. I will be calm. I will not jump to conclusions. I will honor that human beings make mistakes. We will problem solve together. Right? Like that. And then, heaven help me when they came in and they were like, I messed up. I was like, okay. Like I had to shift. I had to remember what I told them I would do. And then the last thing I would say is that when building culture, I really would watch body language, because it takes people a little while to warm up and tell you what they're thinking and feeling and be authentic in that space. So if I could see someone tense up a little bit, I'd back off. We don't need to talk about that this moment. Nothing bad happens if we don't cover that. It's not urgent. And so I would just pay attention to the cues until they felt comfortable using their words. And the last thing is that I would take ownership and accountability if I messed up. Like if I was not my best self that day and I was like, listen, I just really was short with you. And I just want to say, I'm sorry. It's not how I want to lead. It's not how I want to act. I'm in a real bad mood. Maybe I should just take myself home and put myself down for a nap. I don't know. But when I'm just a little too in my humanity, acknowledging that and just being like, I'm real sorry. You don't deserve that. I'm just real grumpy. And usually they just laugh at me, but because I was so genuine about it. But just leading by example in that way, and that self-accountability can produce really effective gains.
Thank you, Dr. Heiser. That was actually one of the questions that came in through the RSVP process about yourself as a leader and how do you navigate that. So thank you for answering that. So we have a question. It says, what tools or strategies do you know of to get buy-in from leadership? This person is working in an organization where DEI is not a priority for executive leadership, and it has them feeling very stuck. So let's have, I'm going to start with Rose, because I know she's in a DEIB role, and give one concrete strategy in a very condensed time on what people can do to bring senior leadership along.
That's a really good question. The first thing that came up for me is the data and how that impacts business outcomes. People typically separate DEI in business, but in fact, your business strategy is a DEI strategy. It should be embedded. And so one thing that you can do, depending on your role, right, is tap into this current surveys that the organization has released. Understand the categories and the themes. What goals came out of that? Right? What communities are saying that they have barriers, right? And how does that even impact people's productivity, innovation? Because that does, right? And think about the company's overall mission, strategy, and goals, and connect the dots, have that discourse, have that conversation with your people leader, get that support, that buy-in from the stakeholders to then present that, maybe it's you, maybe it's them, to the senior leadership team. Because I guarantee you, if they see that it's connected to the goal, connected to the strategy, and it does impact, now we're on the same page to figure out, how do we change this? How do we shift this? How do we collaborate to make a change?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rose. And the key I would add there is that you have to know that it's a continual process. You have to keep chipping away at it. If you hit those three areas that Rose just described, the data, the mission, the vision, and values, and you keep hitting at it and pointing them back to that, you're going to begin to chip away. I'm going to invite Tara to add into this question if you have anything, and then we'll end with Dr. Heiser.
Yeah, I, again, 100% agree with Rose. People make everything run. Nothing runs without people who are happy, who feel comfortable coming to work, because if not, you'll have a rotating door of hiring new people, trying to find people to also see the vision and the mission. And so it would be wise for senior leaders to keep their people happy, to keep their people well, so they can create that culture, so they can also be as passionate about the mission. Because if they're disgruntled, they're not going to advocate for what they're doing or stay very long.
Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Heiser, did you want to close us out with any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. It's expensive for people to leave, and it completely stalls out your business process depending on where they are. One thing I would offer is to find or try to find an example where the leadership was maybe getting, we know DEIB are not synonyms. So find an example where they got something right with one of those elements and lift that up. Leaders like to be praised. They like positive feedback. If you have a great leader, they usually like constructive feedback too. But DEIB work is hard work and it's never ending work. So if there are spaces where people really do something well, lifting that up can be an effective strategy for showcasing like, oh, it was that easy. Like we just celebrated a metric because we said we would. Right? Something like that, right? And then build on that to get deeper and deeper into the work. I also think I've been positioned at times where I've gotten a little more assertive and said things like, I'm struggling to see how this is a values congruent decision. And you will see people stop and be like, it's not. But it will pause the conversation in its tracks without throwing like you're being unequitable, like, you know, and like terrifying everybody, you're being a racist, right? Like all the white people shut down, run home, cry, because that's sometimes how we process things. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, no. Like I'm struggling to see how this is congruent with how we collectively said we wanted to behave as an organization. And then it's, you know, really helps people to bring it back to like, oh, we're here for a big purpose.
Right. So the question, thank you, Dr. Heiser. The question, Solace, was how do you bring leadership along who might be resistant to DEI? So they were providing specific strategies on how do you bring people along because this person was feeling stuck in their role and they didn't know how to move people along. So the strategies that people shared was connecting it to the data, the mission and values. Tara talked about it, connecting it to the satisfaction of people within the organization, the importance of not having a rotating door and not having retention issues. Dr. Heiser talked about the importance of helping people to understand what they're doing right in addition to what they're doing as wrong, and realizing that people don't always want to feel like they're just not doing anything right. Now, that doesn't mean we hide from the truth, but one of the things that's really effective that we do in DCC is when we do the equity of climate assessment or any of the millions of assessments and evaluations we do, Dr. Heiser, we sometimes have some painful data for people, but she always starts off our reports with what are the bright spots and then what are the spots of growth. So what she's done is really create an environment for people to see like everything isn't going horrible. And if everything is going horrible, she has learned how to help people to understand how to digest that. It's magic. It's not magic, actually. It's hard work, but starting out with the bright spots helps because when we go into an organization, they're already on the defense that now the consultant has come in and now you've taken a climate assessment and people are really fearful of what the data looks like. So she comes in with the disarming strategy of here are your bright spots. Here's where we notice you're getting it right. Here's where your employees, connecting it back to Tara, have said, this is making them happy. They feel heard, seen, and respected. We're connected to the data like Rose said. And then we lay on, hey, this is where you all need to grow. And here's how we can come in and help you grow. So it's a way of being able to know that, you know, in the words of Bell Hooks, in order for us to end domination, we have to convert a lot of people to end their oppressive practices, which means that we don't get to the process of conversion by just, you know, basically making people feel like there's no way for them to be redeemed, to be able to grow and to change and to heal. And so part of our approach is we are always truthful. We're going to tell you what's going on, but we're going to make sure that you can hear us, because for us, this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And to actually, I'm training for a half marathon, to get to that finish line, it takes strategy. It takes a lot of different moves that you need to make. So I want to do two things here. One, drop our survey in the chat box for those of you who have to hop off because we're at the, you know, we're coming upon the close of this. We'd love your feedback on the survey. I do want to quickly answer these two questions that were based on the protocol here. One person said, when the majority is white people and then the majority vote could be harmful, what about consensus decision making? And how do you ensure that people of color and marginalized identity can veto a decision if necessary? So the number one, the entire process of the include protocol is consensus making, because you start off with your own individual list. You go in a small group with people and you all are talking about and negotiating what you want to raise. And then the understand part of it and the lead and the decision process itself has you going through each and every norm and checking the environment for who's speaking, who's not speaking. Are you getting diversity of people, experience, years in the organization? So consensus making and hearing from everybody is actually built in the process of the protocol. Number one. Number two, now, consensus decision making. I love consensus decision making, but unless you're a strong facilitator, you can get stuck in consensus decision making because you can keep going in circles and circles within the group. And sometimes people don't understand that consensus means that you all don't have to agree. We just need to be able to raise all the concerns and make sure that everyone's been heard, seen, and respected. And then we actually move on with what is considered a majority vote in the process. So I hear what you're saying. Another way that you can do this is that you could use any of the electronic polling features. If you're worried about people of color voices being heard, you can actually use electronic polling to be able to vote on the final set of norms. You could actually use anonymity by asking people to write their proposed norms on on the small yellow Post-its, and then you can have all the norms posted around your room, and then everybody gets to go ahead and put their post where they think the norm should be, and that would give you an opportunity to kind of see as a facilitator who's moving where, who's not speaking, where the majority votes on this norm. So there are different ways that you can massage the process to ensure that, but that's a really good question. The second question was, how do you facilitate this if you have 60 people in a group? Great question. So if you have 60 people within a group, I would recommend putting them in groups no larger than 6. So you can do 10 groups of 6 around the room, and you would run the protocol the same way. You would just have them in groups of 6. And it's going to probably take you about 90 minutes to 2 hours to actually facilitate this activity because you're going to have a large group of people moving through this protocol. You can also send me an email. My assistant will email everybody who came to the webinar, and I can talk to you more offline about some strategies on how you can do that. But you can still facilitate. It's just going to take you a lot longer to get to it. But I still think it's worth it, even if you have a staff of 60. Sometimes what I've seen people do in the past when it's a really large group is you can have this happening with 30 and 30. So it could be facilitated by 2 people in 2 separate rooms. And then the 30 room brings their norms, the 30 room brings their norms, and then you come together and have a discussion that way. So it's another way that you can break it down. Okay, so let me, think we got everybody's questions in. I'm going to share my screen for the very, very last slide here. Okay, so thank you all for engaging with us. Again, you know, when we come together and do these sessions, it is tactical and practical within our 45-minute time frame. If you want to learn more about how we build equity culture with people, you can feel free to set up a 15-minute consultation with us and we'll talk to you about this process. One of the ways that we build equity culture with people is by doing the bright spots, the equity climate assessment that I talked about that Dr. Heiser does. We provide the team with a conscious leadership for equity workshop, and then we provide the organization with an equity blueprint, which is called our equity purpose to practice. And then from there, after you have those 3 services, organizations can add on whatever they want. They can do racial healing work, one-on-one coaching, impact evaluations. We can work with you with your collaborators and your stakeholders. Whatever you want, we can do. So if you're interested in learning more about how do we lead people through the process of building an equity culture as an organization, in the email that you will receive from us, you can go ahead and click that you're interested in scheduling a 15-minute consultation, as well as in the feedback form that's listed in the chat box. You can also indicate your interest for reaching out to us, and we will connect with you. As always, these webinars are a part of our desire and developing capacity to build an army of people to lead for equity and justice and to build equity cultures in their organization, regardless of whether or not their companies or their organizations decide to invest in DEI. This is our love back to the people so that we can build people's capacity. Even if the leadership is stuck, you come to our webinars and you will have some tools and strategies that you can use within our organization. And we do this in service of our shero Bell Hooks, who says that true resistance begins with people confronting pain, whether it's yours or someone else's, and wanting to do something to change it. And this is our resistance to the incredulous attack against DEI, BJ, whatever acronym you want to call it. Our resistance to this movement that's happening to stifle equity and justice is that we're going to confront the pain of people in everyday organizations by providing you all with tools so that when you want to do something, you can actually change it. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you on September the 29th for our next webinar.